We are here in the sewing corner today, so of course that means I have another sewing project for y'all. Very excited about this one. I try to do at least one, if not two of these a year. I'm hoping this year to get two done, but I am bringing you one of my linens project. So this is where I take something like a tablecloth or pillowcases or whatever and upcycle it into a piece of clothing. And today what I have for us here is this really gorgeous blue tablecloth. This is a pretty large tablecloth. It has all of this gorgeous like hand rainbow embroidery throughout. You can see it obviously going down here. And then we also have these roses here. It's just an absolutely gorgeous piece of fabric. It feels really nice, and I think it's gonna just make a really, really cute shirt. So the shirt pattern that I picked out for it is this one here from 1948. It features this very fun ruffle, which I have so many trims to choose for this ruffle that it's actually gonna be a hard choice. And my hope is to do view number one with the long sleeves, but we're gonna all find out how the cookie crumbles when we cut it. I think it should work out okay. This is, like I said, a very large tablecloth, so I think we should be able to pull off number one. Will actually look a little bit like the image itself. I love advanced patterns are some of my favorite out there. They just have some details that I prefer. This one also, like, it has the ruffle cuffs that I think are really fun to go with the ruffle. It's just definitely very different from anything else I have in my wardrobe, which with this color of blue is a little bit challenging because I have a lot of this blue in my wardrobe. So yeah, I wanted to find something that I felt like was unique, and this definitely fits the bill. I think it will be like the perfect kind of challenging make while also being a little bit more simple and smaller scale than some of my recent projects, which has been one of my goals. I'm really excited to take this and make it up, and we're gonna hop straight into the cutting out, and I will figure out what I'm doing from there. First, I had to start with all of my prepping steps. In this case, I attached my ruffler foot to my sewing machine, and I'm going to pre-ruffle all of my trim. The pattern actually has you gather this kind of like a normal thing, but I would rather not do that, and I would rather get kind of a truer, poofier ruffle. And then I am figuring out exactly how I want to cut out this shirt. It's very important when working with things like tablecloths to think carefully about placement. I decided I want the border down the button front and then across the bottom, as well as on the sleeves. I thought all of those would be cute details, and then I just was thinking through how I wanted my collar and my bib and all of those things to align accordingly. Plus, on top of working with embroidery, I'm also working with essentially a big plaid, so I had to make sure all of these lined up as well. So this was while not like a huge number of pieces to cut out, it was a lot of different moving pieces to think about. And as always, this is my invite over to Patreon, where you can support me for $5 monthly. Right now, I pay to be here on this channel. I'm paying about $1 an hour to work on this, so I always really appreciate the financial support via subscriptions. And if you don't want to commit to monthly subscription, I also do have my Ko-fi, where you can go over and buy me a coffee one time. Like I said, I really appreciate all of this. And then I do always like caveat it with like, please don't spend money if you don't have money to spend right now. I understand that everybody is economically feeling a squeeze for a lot of reasons right now. For 1940s shirts, I usually skip the tucks. I find them weird, and they make the shirts weird to wear untucked. So I'm not going to do any of the tucks, and I didn't mark any of the tucks. However, of course, I am going to put in the bust darts. Very, very key in a shirt like this. So I am marking that here. I'm trying to use a lighter chalk because the blue is not going to show up well from this for my ink pen that is water soluble. So we are moving forward with just the chalk. And then I'm pressing the darts. I try to press them a little bit from below and then mostly from up above, because that is how the dart actually ends up looking. I do fear here that I have maybe accidentally given myself flower nipples, but we'll find out if that is the case later. The other thing I'm doing at this point is I am going to figure out exactly where my center front fold is. I actually cut the center front fold for this a little bit short because of where I wanted the embroidery to sit. I wanted to make sure the embroidery was shown. So I have a little less of a facing to work with. However, I'm not using huge buttons or anything, so that should be just fine. And now I am pinning up the side seams. It's really important to me that my plaids, or like if the lines, they aren't really a plaid, I guess, match on the sides. So I'm making sure those align, as opposed to maybe it exactly aligns up at the top or the bottom of the shirt, because I can always kind of trim those up. However, I can't fix unaligned lines. And while it's not perfect, I do love a great lineup match like what you see here. And then for the yoke, I am sewing together the shoulder seams, which is essentially the side seams of the shoulders, because this is going to then get attached eventually to the bodice that I just made. But first I have pinned on my trim, and then it just tells you to do a double turn fold where the ends are, so like the front of the shirt, and it actually also really tells you where to actually place the ends. How for the back one you can have it stop right before the button placket starts, and then the top one you need to obviously go all the way. I really appreciated that because that's not a detail you often see on vintage patterns. Usually they kind of leave you to figure that out yourself. And then here I am just fully basting on that ribbon. I obviously have it pinned, but before I sandwich things, I want to give it a basting stitch so that way I don't have to worry about the ruffle shifting in any way, shape, or form. I've also basted around the bottom of that yoke, and now I'm pressing it up. I like to have a basting stitch to guide the press, otherwise I notice I don't tend to press evenly enough for this to look clean. This will also let me cut for curves if I need to. With this material, I didn't need to, but it is also great to do the basting trick here because then it allows you to cut without risking things as much. And then I'm going to get this pinned. First I pin from the bottom, and then I'll move it around and I'll pin from the top because I will ultimately sew from the top, but it is easier to get everything aligned while looking at the underside. It's kind of annoying and tedious, but it is what works best for me ultimately. And then I am top stitching everything together. And I'm also going to stick in my interfacing here just to make sure my button placket is nice and sturdy. I used to skip this occasionally, but I've found for button-ups it's a non-negotiable for having something that looks really clean at the end. And now I'm just quickly interfacing the collar here. This is pretty straightforward. Since I use these strips, I do have to like cut out multiple, but I find once you press them, it still acts like one big piece of interfacing. I haven't experienced any problems washing or anything when I use this technique. So I think it's okay. Obviously, let me know in the comments if you've had a different experience. But I just really prefer using these interfacing strips rather than cutting out my own interfacing. And then in this case, this pattern has you do kind of a sandwich with then a bias binding that will go into the facing. I decided to use this cute bias binding that I made for a dress previously. I thought it complemented the inside and just would be a cute little detail. Also, I'm lazy and I didn't want to cut bias strips out of this material, / this material is too thick. So it works for a combo of reasons. And then once I have that pinned, I'm just getting a nice press on the collar to make sure everything leans the way I would like it to. And then after tacking down that bias facing, I am now also going to sew in my tag here. I feel like these days I'm always figuring out where exactly to put my tag because it has been a minute since I've done a lot of traditional facings. But with that done, I am ready to put in the buttonholes, and I have my ever faithful surveyor here. She is making sure my buttonholes are straight and looking good. Maybe sleeping on a thing of thread, but we won't report her for sleeping on the job. And I'm also going to do a double turn hem on the bottom. I'm doing a little bit thicker of a double turn hem than what I maybe usually do because I need this to have some weight to anchor it down. If it's too thin, this is the type of fabric that will kind of like flip up on itself in a way that I don't like. So yeah, just giving it that little bit thicker hem. Now I'm hand sewing on these buttons. I went with these cute, it's like an alternating yellow and pink scheme. There was also a blue version of this button, but I decided to just go with the pink and yellow because I liked the contrast and I liked the way it matched with the embroidery, and I felt like the blue kind of like lost that. And I love being able to make my own clothes because details like this are just kind of my favorite. And now I'm turning my attention to the sleeve. They have you sew up the sleeves and sew up the cuffs and then sew everything together. I'm just doing pinking finishing for the edge of these cuffs, and then just really paying attention to the way the lace ends. And then I'm going to pin these two things together, but first I have to pink and press open the seams here. I don't know if I mentioned earlier in this video, but I am using pinking to finish this. This is a very dense staple cotton. That's one of the things I love about upcycling linens is how dense the fabric usually is. So I don't feel the need to finish it past this. And then here I am actually pinning the cuffs on. I will say I miscalculated the cuffs a tiny bit, so they're a little bit big, but luckily they're gathered, so I can just kind of gather them more and press everything together and make it work. And we're just going to continue to use random pieces of bias trim. This is another piece from another project, and I am just using this for my bias binding channel. I ended up choosing this bias tape because it's really important for me that these aren't itchy. You can just use a hem tape, but I find those itchy to wear and bad for my sensory issues, so I prefer to use something like this. But yes, this is my binding channel, and then I'm going to put elastic into it. And then I'm going to be easing the sleeve in here, and with that, we're wrapping up this video and all ready for the reveal. I can't wait for you to see how this blouse turned out. You have seen the reveal. I hope you enjoyed it. I always love that colorway of rhododendrons. As always, for our wrap-up portion, I am doing the cost breakdown. I am talking about my final thoughts on the project, and last I will be going over things making me hopeful in my Hope Help segment. So as far as cost breakdown goes, this is kind of a mid-range project. I looked back and I think I paid about $35 for this tablecloth, which was ultimately like a couple yards of fabric. So not a like great price per yard, but not a bad one either. Notions wise, pretty inexpensive here. This trim I remember getting in a $2 grab bag, and I have a lot of it, so I like literally didn't even count a cost because it was probably like cents. And then we have just, so the buttons, the label, and the thread were kind of the big costs here, coming in at $5 even actually. And then the last cost was the pattern, and this was one of those patterns that I took the gamble on being complete for $9.76, and it was complete and perfect. I mean, there were actually a couple issues with the pattern as far as like ripping, but I'm happy with that price, bringing me to a supply cost total of $49.76. So honestly, all of that pretty happy with. $50 for a high quality cotton shirt that looks really cute and I like a lot, is great. And then as far as this took me, this was a little bit longer for a blouse, and some of that is just the added things you have to figure out when you're working with something like a vintage tablecloth. So this did end up taking me 45 minutes to cut out, which is pretty long for a shirt. Usually a shirt takes me a half hour tops. Sewing took me 4 hours and 45 minutes. Hand sewing was only a half hour because it was just the buttons and the label. And that brings me to a labor hour total of 6. Oh, hi Spooky. All right, she has joined us. Oh, you're yelling. Do you see a bird? I don't see a bird. I see a lot of bugs. That brings us to 6 hours, and then I have not had time to recalculate my labor costs for LA, which I think is my next stop. So I calculated my living wage cost in Seattle. A living wage by definition, the one that I use is between 2 scales, one being minimum you need to live, the other being what you need to live comfortably. So I go somewhere in the middle, like that's like, you know, more middle class living. I would argue if you're working full time, you should make a middle class living, and that's my feelings on that. That is not where we are here in the States, that's for sure. Oh my goodness, you are so squirrely. Multiplying 6 by $51 is $306 of labor costs. This is what I would need to charge to pay myself a livable wage here in Seattle to sew. Of course, this is not one-to-one with a factory. I was like kind of recently sobered by why I talk about this. It was the 13th anniversary of the Rana Plaza collapse, which killed a lot of garment workers, and these garment workers were forced to work under conditions that it was actually recommended that all of the factories close until they looked at the structure. The thing collapsed, it killed a bunch of people, and brands like H&M were using them. So that's why I talk about this labor cost, is not just to talk about us here in the States, but also talk about the way the States exploits the global South to have cheap clothing. I know that it's really easy to think that nobody gets hurt when you buy something cheap off of Shein, but people actually get hurt and die over that labor. I'll link an article about the Rana Plaza collapse if you want to learn more. Really, really tragic, really upsetting. I can't believe it's been 13 years and we've still seen such little change for the human rights of garment workers. Like, I just think every year how many horrible articles I read about how they're being treated. So I just want us to, like, while I want to talk about what a living wage means here in Seattle and in the US, I do also at some point want to talk about what a living wage looks like abroad. Those numbers are just a lot harder to find since I speak English. Those will take probably like 5 to 6 hours of research to put together and feel good about it. But I do want to make sure that I'm also highlighting global workers, because we exploit people for cheap fashion. I think it's very concerning that fashion is the only good that has pretty much gone down in price, which means that people are being exploited. I mean, people are being exploited by things going up in cost, of course, like technology as well. We know if it's going down in price, someone's being exploited. But that brings me to a supplies and paying a living wage costs total of $355.76 that I would have to sell this for to make a living wage and get back the cost of my supplies. Of course, I don't sew for a living, and I would never consider sewing for a living because, quite frankly, we don't value it enough. But you know, I guess if AI takes my job, I can always sew and pivot to tailoring, which does not sound exciting at all, actually. Because the other thing that, like, I guess not to like pivot again, but back to people who do this for a living, this is backbreaking work. I don't know how you feel after you've sewn all day, but it's usually not great, and we're up and down when we sew because we do the whole garment. If you are actually in a factory, you are doing doing one thing over and over again, which means you are moving significantly less. The quotas are terrible. Yeah, I do definitely want to get back to like reading more globally and giving you guys some hard research on what it's like to be a garment worker and why I talk about this cost. I think where we buy our clothing is so important, and honestly the easiest thing to do is just buy secondhand. There is so many clothes. I believe it's something like we could clothe the next 7 generation out of the clothes on this planet. So buy secondhand when you can, whether that's thrifting in person, but honestly also using sites like Poshmark, which are really great. We are past the cost breakdown, and I do want to talk about the project itself. I'm hoping it is very sunny here today, which I'm actually quite psyched about. But I have this guy here, this very nice little blouse. I love this. Honestly, I feel like I'm on a roll on blouses, and I think one of the big impacts is the fact that I never skip the interfacing here anymore. And I feel like I've gotten actually finally a good like button method, button and buttonhole matching method, because one of my other complaints was a gap. And the bicep, which in this one I don't have to worry about, but other ones I do. I just really feel like I've figured out how to make a blouse I liked. Another one is fabric choice, figuring out what fabrics can do what. I think for years I was just using bad fabric choices with blouses because they were kind of, I don't want to say like throwaway projects to me, but because I so often don't like blouses. So I feel like now I'm really figuring out what I like in a blouse, and I absolutely adore this. I was worried it would be a bit flower nipple-y here, and it's not, thank God. I wanted to be able to wear this for work. This is very clearly to me a work shirt. Will say I think I could go a little tighter on the elastic on the arms, although I do kind of like for my own sensory needs that it's loose. It is kind of a weird length on me because it's actually like, it gets kind of up in the elbow instead of being that 3/4 length that it's designed to be, and I think if I tightened up the elastic that would help. I'm just going back and forth on whether I even want that. I do feel cute enough without doing that I might not. I am very pleased with my side seam pattern matching. I will say shoulder pattern matching, not great, but the side seam is really cute. And I also find, which luckily it's on the back, I don't love this asymmetry here with the flower here and then this little stripe. The flower is almost in the middle enough. I'm thinking about unpicking this, actually this hand embroidery, which kind of makes me sad, but I think I would like the symmetry a much better back here because otherwise it is symmetrical. I think my fabric placement of this was great. I think my fabric choice for the pattern was great. I think my trim choice was great. I will note this trim was an inch shorter than the recommended trim. And I do think a 3-inch trim, which is what was recommended, and I used 2 inches, would have been ideal, but I think this definitely still worked really well. I'm pretty proud of this, and I don't know that I really have, honestly, any for real complaints about it. It's comfortable. It breathes really well. I wore it for the day, and I didn't feel like my arms were tight. And also, I didn't feel like the collar was tight, which can be iffy for me on shirts, especially these older patterns. I feel like I'm being like strangled by the collar. So the fact that I don't for this is great. Honestly, I'm really proud of this piece, and it's really making me want to use up all of my tablecloths that I've been hoarding for shirts because I feel like I'm on a roll right now. So yeah, I'm very pleased. Tickled pink, you could say. What's my last segment? Oh yes, hope helps. Not gonna lie, it's been feeling really heavy. I've started to actually keep an active note about where in my personal life I feel hope and joy. It's tough out there right now. I think as many of you know, I work in tech. The layoffs are really scary here. I have a lot of friends that have been touched by it, and we're all, I wouldn't say like panicking, but it's just, it feels like the industry's dying, and it also feels like it's kind of one of the last industries that you were guaranteed a middle class living. It's not, I'm gonna be transparent, like I'm not feeling great right now. Like sometimes I like just get to the end of the day and I feel so heavy. But I think it is so important still in these times to find joy and happiness and regulation and hope. So I wanted to talk about some of the ways that I feel hopeful. I've been taking notes, and I am actually quite pleased with myself I've started to take a lot more notes. I feel like as I get older, like I've finally realized I'm not gonna remember things when I'm like, you'll remember that. No, I won't. So yes, one of the things that sounds funny but made me feel hopeful is women's hockey. I grew up going to Avs games occasionally, watching the Avs on TV. Hockey has been one of the only sports that I really enjoy. It's fast-paced. It's just always been a like favorite sport for me. And it's funny because a lot of people don't necessarily know that about me. So when coworkers hear me talking about hockey, like I think sports ball man, they think that's really funny. But anyway, I went to a Torrent game against Minnesota. I met up with a bunch of my sewing friends. I'm doing season tickets next year actually, and I'm really excited for that. So if you're in Seattle or in the Seattle area, I recommend going to a Torrent's game. And if you see me, say hi. I'm thinking about making a custom bedazzled jersey for next year, assuming we get season tickets. We haven't locked them down yet. But anyway, why does hockey make me feel hopeful? Men's hockey doesn't make me feel particularly hopeful. Women's hockey, hell yeah. It's been so cool to watch watch the Professional Women's Hockey League start to like grow and really take off this year. I was so excited when it started last year. When I remember to, I need to just put the games in my calendar. I watch them on YouTube. You can just stream them. It's like one of the only sports you can easily watch without paying extra fees. I just think hockey is a really cool sport. It's exciting to see women get the recognition they deserve. And also what I love about torrent games and why I want season tickets is it truly feels like very high-spirited community. The DJ track is just right because it's very like feminine bops. They have all these fun themes, which the last theme of the one I went to was Barbie themed, so people like dressed up in Barbie gear. It's kind of actually a fun fashion moment for me as well. And also like one of the things that like, it sounds weird, warmed my heart because I'm basically going to talk about us booing a player. There is a player on the Minnesota Frost who has historically been transphobic, and she works with transphobic orgs, and everybody just booed her all game. And it felt so nice to be in such an inclusive hockey space, because I will say I don't think of hockey as historically being super queer friendly. The Kraken and the ones in Seattle have always been very queer friendly, but the Kraken didn't exist when I moved here, so that's very much the case. Like, I don't necessarily think of hockey, even though I would argue hockey is a very homoerotic sport. It is not the most pleasant place for queer members. I think that is shifting overall, but it was so nice that like people really like care about trans rights, and to hear so much care about trans rights through the booing of somebody at a hockey game just reminded me that there are still places for us. Also, like a lot of people like put together all these like love for trans people signs that got showed the whole game, and like I don't know, it warmed my heart because I saw such allyship and advocacy for trans people in sports. And we also have a non-binary player on our team. I'm not gonna cry about it, but like sports is not a place I've ever felt included. And what I've loved about torrent games is how included I feel in the culture, and like it's just meant a lot to me because this has historically been a space I feel really like hostile energy from, not like hockey but like sports in general. So like experiencing something like that has just meant a lot to me. I've only been to 2 games this season, but it's just been joyful, and that's why I'm getting season tickets. I also know they're going to be more expensive because people are really showing up and supporting women's hockey, which like makes my heart smile. It's not like it's saving the world or anything, but like it does matter, and like seeing a place in sports where trans people are welcome just really matters a lot to me. I swear these are happy tears, but I'm just like, I feel so grateful to have that space and have gotten to experience that, and I can't wait for my next season supporting the team. Who knew I would be crying about sports ball this year? In the face of everything going on, it's just been a very joyful and fun community space where I feel like I can show up as authentically myself. Another thing that gave me hope is one thing that I will really give my work A++ for. You guys know this, I fundraise every year for Point of Pride, is they do a lot of subsidiary work for either volunteering or donating. We get donation matches up to a certain amount. We get money to donate for our volunteer hours that we put in. And then we also have 2 days off that we can volunteer with, like kind of no questions asked. And then we also, on top of that, have a global week where we go out and do volunteer projects as a team. And we had one of those recently. And I can't believe that this gave me so much hope, but it did. So we worked in a green belt doing blackberry and ivy clearing we're trying to restore native habitat in different places in the city. I volunteer with a group like this every year for this week because I really like if I'm going to get paid to volunteer and not have to show up to work, I want to be out. I want my hands in the dirt. Even if it's picking out blackberries, I've mastered my blackberry protection wardrobe. It's a little warm some days. I don't have that many scratches this year, so I'm very happy about that. We volunteered and we worked with a woman. She told us about how she's been doing habitat restoration work in this area for 15 years, and she talked about what it looked like when she first started. And now when you walk through it, you see a lot of native plants. She can tell you the ages of like all the trees in the area that they've planted that have been native. And it was just like it always feels good to put your hands in the dirt and to do something like this, but it was also just a really nice reminder that you can have a really real impact through steadfastness and focus. Jerry has focused her time in Seattle on this one greenbelt, and she's gotten to see it very literally grow and thrive and be restored. Yeah, that is a kitty cat. It was just a really nice, like, literal reminder that one person can have a lot of impact. And yes, you can be super negative and look at it and think, oh, she spent 15 years and dedicated, and like it's not even that big of an area that's been changed. But like that is actually like not true. I mean, it is technically true, but one person, again, through steadfastness and discipline and dedication, can have that much impact on a local ecosystem. Our city ecosystems and our parks are so important. And it was just a really cool reminder. If you stick with something and you commit to something, you can have change and you can actually get to see that change yourself. I don't know, that just like made me very happy. And also she was just such a joy. She was so happy to have us there. Gosh, it's really satisfying. We were like kind of in a small clearing where they've done, I don't know, like English ivy and blackberries are awful to get out, especially in the Pacific Northwest. And it was really satisfying. It was like 12 of us to see when we were done, like just kind of this huge clearing that had been opened up. I like personally worked on one big pile of, it was a mix of ivy and blackberries. And I saw ferns peeking through, and it was very satisfying to clear all the blackberries and all the ivy and hopefully help those ferns like grow and they got sunlight again. And it just was very satisfying, and it gave me hope, and it reminded me that being steadfast and dedicated to your causes, you will see change, even though sometimes it will take a really long time. And that just was a nice reminder. It's so funny because some of you have called it what it is, practicing gratitude. And it's not, I think practicing gratitude just never really resonated with me. And I find myself, I would say I don't have a practice of gratitude. I would say I have a practice of hope. With that, we're gonna always pivot awkwardly into my outro. As always, give this a thumbs up and comment down below. It really helps me out in the algorithm. And then of course, subscribe if you haven't already. I would love to have you here. And then as always, you can financially support me over on Ko-fi or Patreon. I always really appreciate the support over there, given I pay to show up here. I do not currently make money, I lose money. But with that, I will see you guys. I think I have one more week of sewing projects. I love the dress that I am making for y'all next week. And I will see you there, 8 a.m. Pacific time. Bye!